If you have ever wondered how one man's vision in the sky could reshape the entire Western world, you're in the right place. Today, we're going to walk through a story that feels almost impossible. A story of power, politics, and still affects your life today. We'll trace Constantine's rise, the moment that changed his destiny, and how his choices reshaped an empire. But what if his vision wasn't the real reason why he converted, and something far more strategic was happening behind the scenes? Why did a single battlefield vision suddenly change the religion of an entire empire? The 28th of October in the year 312 was an extremely important date in world history. It was on this day that the forces of Constantine and Maxentius, two rivals for power in the western provinces of the Roman Empire, clashed around the Milvian Bridge that extended over the river Tiber, near the city of Rome. Constantine would emerge from the battle victorious and went on to become the ruler of the western provinces, and then over the entirety of the Roman Empire in 324. After he defeated Maxentius, a claimant power in the eastern provinces. Even more significant than the battle itself were the events surrounding it. Shortly before the battle commenced, Constantine is said to have seen a chi-rho or cruciform shining brightly in the sky. The symbol of the cross Jesus was crucified on. This was later interpreted by Christian writers like Eusebius as a sign of God's divine favour. Constantine interpreted it as such too. So inspired was he by the appearance of the chi-rho that he converted to Christianity and completely transformed Roman religious policy, issuing an edict the following year, which moved from persecuting the Christians to tolerating them. By the end of his reign, Christianity was gaining ground as a kind of state religion, a remarkable turnaround in an empire that systematically persecuted the same group since the middle of the 3rd century. Okay, here, I want to explore how all of this came about. Was Constantine really just inspired by a miraculous vision in the sky, or were there more extensive and political reasons for his conversion? To uncover the truth, we must rewind to the forces shaping Constantine long before the vision ever appeared. How does a boy from a fractured empire rise to command armies and reshape global faith? Okay, let's backtrack a bit here to look at where Constantine came from and how he came to be leading an army outside Rome in the late autumn of 312. He was almost certainly born in the year 272 in the Roman province of Moesia, which roughly approximate to modern-day Serbia. His father was a Roman general named Constantius, who became a very senior figure in the government of Diocletian, the Roman emperor from 284. Diocletian's ascension came at the end of a period during which the Roman Empire had nearly collapsed, owing to multiple crises since the end of the Severan dynasty in 235. These included endless civil wars that had seen dozens of emperors come and go over 49 years, constant attacks over the northern border in Germania and the Balkans by Germanic and Asiatic tribes like the Franks and the Samaritans, hyperflation and wars in the east against the likes of the Palmyrans and the Sassanid Persians. Diocletian brought the 3rd century crisis to an end by implementing wide-ranging reforms, notably the creation of a new system of imperial rule whereby a college of 4 emperors, 2 senior and 2 junior ones, was created to ensure a peaceful succession. Constantius was one of the benefactors of this, becoming a Caesar or junior emperor in 293, and then being promoted to Augustus or senior emperor in 305. As a result, Constantine was partly raised at the imperial court of Diocletian at the city of Nicomedia in northwestern Turkey, just across the Bosporus from modern-day Istanbul. As such, he was born in the heartland of the Christian movement, which in ancient times was centred in the Greek-speaking eastern provinces of the Roman Empire around Turkey, Greece, the Levant and Egypt. These early contexts are important. The Christian movement had swelled in the 3rd century, from one that was confined to an estimated 50,000 followers in the middle of the 2nd century, to several million followers by the end of the 3rd century. Historians generally assume that the cause of the expansion was owing to the 3rd century crisis. People turned to a new religion which had promised a paradise in the afterlife at a time when the real world had turned very gloomy. And at the same time, the state authorities were deeply troubled by the rise of this monotheistic religion that urged people to worship a sole deity over the old gods and the imperial cult of the emperors. Although it was later claimed by Christian writers that their movement had faced incessant persecution from the time of the Emperor Nero onwards, in reality the Romans were fairly disinterested in Christians in the 1st and 2nd centuries. And it was only during the short reign of the Emperor Decius between 249 and 251 that sustained persecution actually began. And I mean, it really peaked in the reign of Diocletian, who began what is known as the Great Persecution, to try and systematically destroy the rise of Christians. And this was an extremely complex thing to do, as by then Christians were to be found everywhere, even embedded within the imperial government. For instance, it is understood that Constantine's mother, a Greek woman named Helena, was a Christian, albeit his father worshipped the old gods and goddesses of Rome and Greece. Constantine might have even attended lectures on Christianity in Nicomedia as a young man, given there by the scholar Lactantius. Thus, he did not suddenly convert out of nowhere in 312. He had been around Christianity for a large part of his life. His early life reveals political pressures and hidden influences that set the stage for a much bigger transformation. But why would an emperor suddenly reverse centuries of persecution and legalize Christianity? So how do we get from the great persecution under Diocletian to Constantine claiming he saw a cruciform in the sky and beginning the conversion of the empire to Christianity just a few years later? Firstly, Diocletian did something very surprising in the year 305. The guy retired. In an effort to ensure the survival of the shared system of rule he had implemented and to allow for a peaceful succession, he stepped down as the senior most emperor. And this meant that Constantine's father, Constantius, was promoted from being a junior emperor with the title Caesar to become one of the 2 senior emperors, and Augustus, in 305. And what a surprise, Constantine was appointed as well into the imperial college as a Caesar. Then, just a year later in 306, Constantius died while he and his son were campaigning in Britain. The legions there then proclaimed Constantine as Augustus, leading to the outbreak of a fresh civil war, the very thing Diocletian had sought to avoid. In Constantine's case, his main rival in the West over the next 6 years was Maxentius. It was a conflict which lasted until 312, when he defeated him at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge and claimed control over the western provinces of the empire. And this leads to the Edict of Milan. This was issued in February 313, a few months after the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. It did not establish Christianity as a state religion. Instead, what it did was state that Christians would no longer be persecuted in the manner which they had been under Diocletian. It was basically a promise of religious toleration for Christians and the worshippers of the old gods alike. It was also not as radical as is often assumed. For instance, 2 years earlier in 311, a year before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, another claimant to the imperial title, Galerius, had issued what is known as the Edict of Serdica, which was the ancient Roman name for what is now the city of Sofia, the capital of Bulgaria. The Serdica announcement basically offered the same toleration to Christians 2 years before Constantine did so. Constantine was mimicking Galerius. The one slight difference is that Constantine actually converted himself. But both claimants to the imperial title had effectively seen which way the wind was blowing in terms of the rapid spread of Christianity, even in the face of state persecution, and decided it was better to have a Christian movement allied with them than fighting against them. Hence, Constantine might have been influenced by his mother's religious background and so forth, but his actions after the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in issuing the Edict of Milan were highly political. The answer lies in a strategic shift that goes far beyond personal belief and leads straight to Nicaea. What forced Constantine to gather bishops from across the empire to rewrite the rules of a growing religion? Constantine's efforts to establish Christianity as a tolerated religion and a core part of the life of the Roman Empire extended beyond his conversion and the issuance of the Edict of Milan. Two things are worth noting here. After he defeated his last major rival of power, Licinius, in 324, who had controlled large parts of the eastern half of the empire, he immediately ordered the construction of a great new capital in the east named Constantinople. We know it as Istanbul today. Later, Christian scholars would later depict this as being a move to build a new Christian capital away from the heavens of Rome, as the Greek East was the real heartland of Christianity at the time. However, this need not necessarily be viewed as a religious move. The emperors had been living away from Rome for a century at this point, as the city was well away from the front lines of the constant invasions of the empire in the east by the Persians and in the north by the Germanic tribes along the Rhine and the Danube frontier. Many emperors had started to establish their court around the Balkans so that they could respond much more quickly to an attack in the east or north. Constantine was simply taking this to another level, building a new capital that was midway between the northern and eastern frontiers. Also, Constantine's decision to convene a great ecclesiastical council at Nicaea on the other side of the Bosporus in Anatolia in 325 is viewed as an attempt to build the Christian movement up. The Council of Nicaea was a seminal moment in the early history of Christianity, as all manner of rules concerning Christian worship and the arrangement of the church were decided upon. Again though, this should not be viewed exclusively as Constantine acting to promote Christianity. It was a political move. For centuries, the emperors had acted as the heads of the imperial cult, a section of Greco-Roman religious system which basically deified the emperors. In setting up a church hierarchy through the Council of Nicaea, Constantine was trying to bring the Christian movement under political control. Rather than having largely independent local leaders all around the Mediterranean, the church would have a hierarchy that was answerable to emperors to a large extent going forward. Thus, within 12 years, Constantine went from granting toleration to the Christians through the Edict of Milan in 313 to forming it into a political entity which he could manage to his dynasty's benefit in 325. What happened at Nicaea reveals how religion became a tool of imperial power, setting up the final transformation. So how did a once persecuted faith become the dominant force shaping laws, culture, and power in the empire? Constantine lived and ruled down to 337, making him the longest ruling emperor of Rome since the very first emperor, Caesar Augustus, over 3 centuries earlier. Constantine's sheer longevity is important. Had he died in 317 instead of 337, for instance, the newfound toleration of Christianity would not have been well established, and his successor or successors might well have reversed course. Instead, Christianity was firmly established by the time of his death. And at the same time, it would not be entirely correct to say that he had established it as a state religion. Paganism, as the worship of the old polytheistic gods of Rome, Greece and Egypt, would soon become known, remained a major part of the religious life of the Mediterranean world. Still, a subtle shift had taken place. Christians were being favoured in the imperial government, and Christian churches were given pride of place in the construction of Constantinople as a Christian capital in the east of the empire. There wasn't open persecution of pagans yet, but it was not far away. During the long reign of his son and heir, Constantius II, animal sacrifices in pagan temples were prohibited, while Christians continued to be favoured over pagans. The brief reign of the Emperor Julian between 361 and 363 saw an effort by this learned young king who was interested in scholarship and Greek philosophy to re-establish paganism as the state religion. But he died while campaigning against the Sassanid Persians in the east just a year and a half into his reign. This opened the way for a series of increasingly oppressive Christian emperors, the worst of whom was Theodosius, emperor from 379 to 395. His anti-pagan campaign was as all-encompassing as Diocletian's great persecution of the Christians had been nearly a century earlier. Paganism would never recover, and by the end of his reign, pagan philosophical schools in Athens and Alexandria were being shut down, and the old temples were being attacked all over the Mediterranean world by mobs of fervent Christians. Constantine had started off looking to establish toleration in the world of religious violence back in 313, when he issued the Edict of Milan. 80 years later, the Christians wanted complete victory over the old religion. Thus, while the Germanic tribes were conquering the Western Roman Empire, the Christians were engaged in a civil war to destroy the pagans within the collapsing empire. The answer shows how Constantine's legacy unleashed a religious revolution that no emperor could reverse. Alright, I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one.
God complex. Haters love to hate, but I never feel pressed. Got a lot on my plate, but I never get stressed.